What is art?
Art is
history.
What is art? That's a good question.
This is Art Uncovered.
Art is our collective cultural history.
A weekly podcast that brings you interviews with an eclectic mix of artists and creators.
Art is
Disappointing your parents.
I'm your host, Kimberly. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I was honored to speak with Emily DiCarlo, a Toronto-based artist whose sound, video, and performance-based work explores the subjective nature of time and its relationship to labor, rest, and the demands of late capitalism. Stay with us. Welcome back, listeners. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I am so honored to be here with Toronto-based artist Emily DiCarlo. Emily, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Emily, I'm thinking to maybe start today's conversation if we could talk a little bit about some of the research that seems to underlie a lot of your work. So a number of your projects refer to something that is called the Coordinated Universal Time, and that's shortened to UTC.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you could, because I don't know much about it all, and I assume many of our listeners don't also. Can you just give us a bit of background as to what this UTC is?
Sure. Yeah. It's a lot of people don't know maybe how it's made or the definition of it, but we live it every day. So, coordinated universal time essentially is the 24 time zones that the world operates on. And prior to 1883, when these time zones were implemented, the world was a bit of a different place. It was a slower place, right? So, but around this time, the Industrial Revolution was starting to pick up pace. Manufacturing was booming. Of course, with all the goods being produced, you needed to ship them. So the railway was expanding at this crazy speed. And you also had communications. You had the telegraph, so these lines were being built. People had a need to communicate with, coast to coast, right? Across these long distances. So all of a sudden, you know, distance was contracted through these things, and we were moving really, really fast. And so this need to coordinate countries, the world, it was pretty dire, sort of near the end while things were speeding up. For example, right before those time zones were implemented, you had trains were running, but
Based on
there
what
was a
clock? Just
yeah, local time, they called it.
okay.
And so, in North America alone, you had 144 local times. Well, try to think about,
Wow.
yeah, trying to coordinate train stations. So, you had, for instance, this is an extreme example, but Baton Rouge and New Orleans, they're about 80 miles apart, but yet there was 23 minutes difference between their local times. So, you know, with this expansion, there were trains coming into stations at times when a train was leaving, so accidents were happening. And yeah, there was just this like crazy acceleration that happened. And so that's when time zones were introduced across the globe.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you introduced that, when you first said, "Oh, things were a lot slower before, UTC," I was like, "Oh, that sounds wonderful." But then you started describing what things would be like without UTC.
It was, yeah, it was crazy. And of course, like, fast forward to today, like it kind of underpins everything right now. We live in a globalized world. So airports, stock markets, all of our wireless communications. I mean, we're in the same time zone, and we had to check that, before this interview, but it really is the underpinning of our daily experience. And to be honest, it's still accelerating. It's still getting faster. And so a lot of my work's really interested in this phenomenon of this experience, and where we fit amongst all of this.
Yeah, in one of your projects, and it's titled "Propagation of Uncertainty," in your statement for that project, you said that UTC, it's not absolute. What do you mean by this?
I guess in the context of coordinating universal time, it's, it feels like this monolith. It feels like something outside of us, something that, yeah, is independent. But as I was doing my research, I was really interested in, well, okay, like how does this even work, and discovered that it's actually this super flawed man-made system. I mean, of course, it is man-made, but once I dug into it, in reality, there's over 100 sites around the world, these official time labs that have these super, super precise atomic clocks, and multiple of them. So, maybe 500 in the world total, or up to that.
500 time labs?
500 clocks, or these
Oh, okay.
official clocks, and it's over a month-long process of, you know calibrating these clocks often what they call drift,
Mm.
um, but it's collecting this asynchronous data. So, these clocks are not perfect. They're always, um, let's say, aspiring to the standard, which is
Mm.
what we know. But it's over this month-long process that all this data goes to a place in Paris called the Bureau of Weights and Measures. It is the end all of all measurements in the world. It creates the universal standards that define what a meter is, what a Kelvin is, like all these different,
Wow.
kilogram, all these
Wow.
things. So, but it takes a long time of getting all this unperfect data to rectify. I mean, it's people in the end that are, sort of sorting through this data, yes, with the help of algorithms at this time, but in the end, it's people deciding what the definition of a minute or a second is,
Mm.
and how, yeah, that spirals out around the world.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I would
yeah.
like to do a screen share here of this project. So this is a video based project, and it's I believe it's multi. I know that the version on your website is, I think, a single channel, but in its installation form, it's a multi channel video
Yeah,
installation.
yeah, it's a three channel,
Okay.
with usually TV monitors mounted on, IT server racks. So, you know, to create this work, I mentioned these time labs, these time sites, right? And for this project, I'm based in Canada. I went to Canada's official time lab in Ottawa, which is the nation's capital, and it was a very strange space to enter, kind of bunker like. You can see that a lot of the aesthetics are unchanged in a lot of ways since it was first built in the 70s, but essentially Canada gets its time from here. And so they have three of these atomic clocks that, should one kick out, there's always these protections behind it to make sure time keeps running, uninterrupted. I don't have a science background. I kind of come at this from an outsider, maybe a romanticized view of, you're in this space and this stuff is important, but it feels very opaque, which is kind of, I think, the daily experience of a lot of people when it comes to thinking about these subjects. So, um, as I moved through the space, I just like meticulously documented the things that were standing out to me, and it was really about finding these traces of humanity, or these, touches of handwritten notes, or what seemingly feels like DIY solutions, like things wired together, or like things almost feeling a little precarious in a way.
Yeah, I see some like handwritten notes in here.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a certain poetry to seeing, like, yeah, these handwritten notes in this very um, official
Yeah.
space, that the country relies on, like Connect Here, for instance, or um, yeah, really, really, really
Sticky
fun
notes.
moments, sticky notes,
That's
and you're
so
just
good.
like, it's really reminding you that it's people. It's
Mhm.
really people that are running it, even though
Mhm.
I had built up a rapport with the team there, and they trusted me and left me alone in the space
Wow.
to survey over 4 hours. And then this still exists in many countries, but in Canada, they still have the talking clock, and I'll get a little more into that later, but
Yeah.
it is this 24-hour narration that of time that anybody can either call this hotline and hear the voice narrated in real time, or find it on a shortwave radio station.
And it just constantly is narrating the time.
Just constantly, 24/7,
Wow.
and has been. It's the same voice, a famous broadcaster in Canada who died many years ago. It's been broadcasting since the 60s. So, there's also something kind of weird about the official time being narrated from beyond the grave. I like to
Yeah, yeah,
kind of laugh
creepy.
about.
Creepy. Yeah, I do want to come back to that because there's another project of yours that kind of talks about that specifically. But I'm curious. So I'm just kind of flipping through your video of propagation of uncertainty here, and it seems like towards the end of the video, we do see a person who is reclined on the floor, kind of looking into the abyss. They're in a black, I don't know, black jumpsuit kind of thing here. Um, what's going on with the ending of this video?
Yeah. It's, as I mentioned, I was in that space for 4 hours total, and with the talking clock narrating through the PA speaker in the room. They had turned it on for me, and um, there was something really oppressive about every 10 seconds being told exactly what time it was. There was
Yeah,
a
it's so
certain
uncomfortable to
and
watch.
it's and this video is only it's under 6 minutes long, and so, and even within that span, I find, watching it, you can get a sense of
Oh,
how
100%.
oppressive that was. But
Yeah.
it had this strange calibrating effect where, I was starting to internalize this rhythm, because there are these sort of beeps that punctuate every 10
Hmm.
seconds.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I started to think about, well, okay, where, me, Emily, where do I fit into all of this, And so it seemed, I do a lot of performance work as well, usually performance for video. Um, and I felt that the most sort of the strongest gesture I could do in that moment was just laying down. And it's almost an act of refusal to move, to be active. But I guess it's active rest in a way. It's an active refusal. It's a refusal in place of, um, I'm just going to lie down and just exist, just breathe,
That's
and
so
that is
good.
all. And even in this space, you can see I don't have shoes on. Like, I got very comfortable. I was hunkering down in a lot of ways. And it points to the exhaustion I think I was feeling as well,
Mm.
that the meticulousness of surveying the space and really becoming one with it, and then just saying, no, no more.
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
gonna lay down and
Did it
just.
feel like an act of refusal while you were doing it?
It did. I mean, it definitely was an intuitive, because I had been playing with pacing, and this rhythm and tempo that I had been calibrated with, and nothing felt right until I laid down. And I had the camera on a a tracker, so it was automated. I was really alone in the room and
Wow.
just with me, myself, and this this voice telling me the time.
So one more question about this project. I'm curious about its title. Again, the title being Propagation of Uncertainty. Where did this come from?
Yeah, so it's actually the mathematical equation used to calculate coordinated universal
No
time.
way. No
Yeah,
way. That's so
I know.
funny.
I mean, again, not I don't have a science or mathematics background, and so when I was, and a big part of my practice is field work and interviewing experts. So,
Mm.
when this was being explained to me, it was like a jolt or a light bulb. I just thought it was so incredibly poetic.
Yeah.
Um, and so, basically what the equation does is it assumes uncertainty or unknown variability sort of at every juncture of this process of collecting the data. So they assume that the standard, the universal coordinated time standard is unstable. They assume that. So we're already putting doubt into into the thing that we're believing in. And then
It's funny when you
they,
put it that way.
they assume uncertainty between, there's going to be discrepancies between sort of that moment of transferring the data. A lot can go wrong, between this transfer. So there's also understanding that there is a difference between this objective standard and the reality of the rotation of our Earth. Our Earth is actually slowing down and speeding up. There's variability in nature
Mhm.
in that. So, you're pitting an ideal up against sort of the complexity of the world. And then, of course, there's also so many unknowns with the system as a whole, as they say. So this whole equation. So, you know, again, when this was told to me originally, I was like, holy
Yeah.
cow. Okay, so you're telling me that there's just uncertainty riddled throughout this entire process, this entire
And our understanding of time.
in our understanding of it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so I felt that was a good entrance
So
point
great.
into, having it mirror our experience in the world that, yeah, we're just perplexed with uncertainty, and it does seem to propagate and has propagated over the years. I
Mhm.
mean, I feel like I actually recorded this work October 2019. So it was
Just
not
before COVID, yeah.
not long after exactly. And
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
I edited it while in lockdown. And I think maybe some of that comes
Mm,
through in terms
mhm,
of the tight shots and the sort of, I don't know, the feeling of isolation.
brilliant. Brilliant. And I'd like to maybe move ahead to the next project I'd like to talk about, which is titled Circular Tea. And as I'm kind of looking at my notes here, that seems a bit like an oxymoron. The title, which is also there seems to be an oxymoron in the title we just spoke about. But anyways, so Circular Tea. This project also explores the idea of the universal standard. So this project, it contains a blend of original text and information derived from official time standard reports. So I'm going to do a screen share here. If you all are watching this on YouTube, you could take a look. So I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us a bit about this project in general, and then we could get into more specific questions as we go on.
Yeah, I mean, this piece I was making simultaneously with propagation of uncertainty. So, if propagation of uncertainty is really about that specific time lab, that location, circular T points more to the whole process and again, Circular T is the actual report that the Bureau of Weights and Measures produces. So in a lot of ways, if we try to think about what is the official clock of the world, it's a report. It's a spreadsheet. It's data in rows and columns. But Circular T, again, when it was such a kind of a beautiful name, which I couldn't resist but calling my own work that. And through this, I was thinking a lot about the people who run these sites and the experiences of trying to calibrate time, trying to steer the course. The clocks drift. They say, oh, it's like steering a giant tanker ship. It's a really slow, laborious process. Um, and again, finding all this poetry. So the work takes shape in these 24 red binders. This particular binder I had actually seen in the Ottawa lab, so that's where a lot of the aesthetics come from. And I started to write these kind of speculative accounts of what it's like to be um, in the different time zones, in these different time labs. And they're all deeply researched. I mean, it starts to kind of blow itself open in terms of that the data comes in the form of poetry, speculative fiction, and touches really on all the variables of time. So it could be anything from, there's a time lab just outside Toulouse, France, and that's kind of near where this very famous cave explorer, Michel Siffre, discovered that where our sleep-wake rhythms are actually dependent on the sun. So he had put himself through this experiment where he went underground for 205 days. And eventually his sleep wake rhythms became, I think he was awake for 36 hours and asleep for 12 hours at a time.
Gosh.
And with no light dark cues, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, there's all kinds of variation in terms of experience time. So a lot of these reports were just ways of highlighting the variation, the texture of time amongst this very organized, all red binders. There are, some binders are completely empty because there are no time labs in that time zone. So you actually can see the weight of power too, where, one binder will be very thick with entries and others not so much. So
It looks like the first image here was in a gallery space. Do viewers have the ability to actually flip through the binders?
Yeah. And in the ways that I've shown in the gallery, it's, there's a bench where you can sit, you can take your time, or there's it's about an hour long recording where it's my voice narrating, and it's a bit of a performance lecture where, I'm reading these reports as though I've just discovered them, and trying to decipher. There's big chunks of footnoting, which we'll say is the real research that legitimizes some of these poetic entries, just to show that all of it is from reality, even though it's a product of my imaginative digesting, we'll say.
So I asked you a question about the previous project that we spoke about time not being absolute. Do you think about that differently in this project?
I think, for both projects, for me, it's really about making visible the invisible. We talked about a lot of people don't think about it, but they live it every day. And There is a theorist I really love, Canadian, Sarah Sharma, and she talks about power chronography. And it's basically the temporal ordering of labor relations across the world. So if you think about some occupations, for instance, like offshore call centers, not everybody's time is valued the same across the world. So, people working in these call centers, they are subject to being on someone else's time. And so, yeah. And so, you think about people who are time poor and time rich, and it's often, it's often embedded in these labor relations. So, it's just about, with this knowledge, maybe some agency can be brought back into people's lives, and how they choose to navigate through the world.
When you say time rich versus time poor people, do you mean people who have a lot of time on their hands versus those who, or I guess free time, quote unquote, non-working time? Is that what you're referring to when you say rich
Yeah,
and poor time?
yeah. Even outside of, say, working outside of the time zone that you live in, you can also think about night shifts as well as this kind of asymmetry that happens in how we work and when we work. Often it's those who have more money, have more time because they can outsource a lot of the daily things that take up our time, doing laundry, running errands. So capital, labor, and time, it's all interlinked.
So the next project I'd like to talk about is titled Talking Clock Choir. And it seems like it has a wildly interesting installation. So maybe we can kind of talk about what the installation is like, and in doing that, we could talk about what's actually going on in here.
Yeah,
And I'll do another
of
screen
course.
share, listeners.
Great.
So, Talking Clock Choir, another fabulous title. So what's going on here?
What's going on here? Yeah, it's a 4-channel audio sound sculpture, that, I discussed what the talking clocks were earlier, that they are these real-time hotlines that people can call into and hear the time narrated by a human in real time. And the phenomenon of these talking clocks came around in the 1930s, and uh, obviously, with the internet and cell phones, and, we don't really need them so much. So they are a bit of an archaic, dying service, we'll say. Uh, and through my research, I discovered that there's still 17 of these active, if not a few more, but sometimes you can't access it unless you're in that particular country. And so I thought it'd be really interesting to use this as source material to create mini compositions that would play every half hour in the gallery.
At the tone, Mountain Daylight Time, 12 hours, 0 minutes exactly.
Across the 4 clocks, or sorry, across the 4 PA speakers. And you might recognize these PA speakers. We see them in subway stations. We probably had them in our elementary schools.
We
Um,
certainly have.
but they come to represent some kind of authority, right? They're usually in a public space, PA, public service announcement speakers, right? So I thought it'd be fun to play with this aesthetic. And each of them, depending on the space that they're going to be exhibited in, have about 100 feet of audio cable that then I snake through whatever architecture it's being exhibited in.
Oh yeah,
And
look at this.
yeah, and you can kind of see from that one visual of it wrapping around one of the water pipes.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose is just to really highlight the infrastructures that are ruling our world.
Here now, Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, the compositions themselves, each of them is made up of sort of four elements. So one element is going to be, and you can't always distinguish what's what, but one element is my voice. My voice is actually in there.
Here now, Eastern Standard Time.
The second element is the Ottawa recording, the Canadian talking clock, because for me it's about the zooming in and zooming out. If we start with me, my experience, and then we zoom out just a little bit more to the official time of the country, and then we zoom out a little bit more, what rotates between the compositions is another time zones. Talking clock has been added. And then the fourth is her name is Amy, and she is the first AI voice to be used for timekeeping. Uh, so it's not only about this like locational geography of spanning in and out, but it's also thinking about past, present, future. The reporter from Canada who's passed away. This is recorded in the 60s. There's my voice. I'm in the present. There's the current other speaking clock somewhere else in the world. And then there's the future of, the reality that these human recorded voices will be eventually moved out, and probably it will only be Amy in the end.
Yeah.
you know
There are two things I want to follow up on. I guess the first one, or my first follow up question is, I'm curious because when we were talking about your first project there, like it just watching it gave me this sense of anxiety, right? Because it was just like this constant countdown. Where this feels less anxiety inducing for me. I'm curious if that's something that you were aware of or trying to play with.
I mean, I don't necessarily want to cause anxiety but
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
it how can you not?
How can you not? For sure, for sure.
How can you not? But definitely this play of anticipation, I think, is a really important dimension of this work. When it's in a gallery, and it's very short compositions, micro compositions, where they're about 30 seconds long, and they only play every half hour. So, you know, with a viewer coming into the gallery with this knowledge, you might be wondering, did I just miss it? Also, am I willing to maybe hang around until I experience it? So it's creating a time scale within the gallery amongst other works that have their own temporalities. And in the times that I've given tours in while it's being exhibited, it's really funny how it will punctuate a conversation. It kind of just like, because the speakers are throughout the space, it kind of just like cuts through everything. And so, there's really nice moments of when it interrupts a conversation or really punctuates a conversation, to what I was saying.
Are they all going off simultaneously, or is it one?
They're all going off simultaneously
Wow.
with different elements. And each of we'll say each of the talking clocks around the world, they're all incredibly unique. It's different voices, different beeps and bloops, we'll say. So each composition highlights the weirdness of each of it. And yeah, like, some of the beeps are modulated and turned into bass elements, which does make it more musical, as you were saying.
Here now, Eastern Standard Time.
At the home, Eastern Daylight Time.
Brilliant. Um, and you mentioned there, and I do want to talk about Amy, was that her name? Was it the first AI voice?
It's the first, in my research, it's the first AI voice that's been used to replace these human recorded talking clocks.
Ah,
And
Roger
it's
that. Okay.
yeah, we're seeing it more in the UK where it's being
Mm,
applied. But
mm, mm.
things are moving so rapidly that I'm sure more changes are coming.
Yeah, yeah. And when was she first introduced to the world?
I'd have to look up
Yeah, yeah, I'm curious.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was pretty recently.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Emily, the last project that I'd like to kind of dissect with you is actually not my understanding. It's not a video or sound-based project. It's actually a more print based object. The title of the project is "We Imitate Sleep to Dream of Descent," which is a collective performance-based project that you designed, and it focuses on the idea of rest as protest. So I'll do another screen share here. We'll see some of like the physical publications of this project. But yeah, take the mic. What's going on here?
Yeah, I think, going back to that final gesture I did in the propagation of uncertainty of laying down on the ground,
Hmm.
um, which was intuitive and spontaneous at the moment. And again, it was October 2019. And then, after I made those works, this idea of rest and sleep, especially over the pandemic, it really came to the forefront of my interests. I mean, I had many sort of side research threads that I was following. I mentioned, that cave explorer who discovered our sleep-wake rhythms. And, I feel like it was just a collective time where everyone, you know, the summer of 2020 and after, people are really, really looking closely at these networks that we had been so yeah, accustomed to. And people all of a sudden realized, I mean, it became very clear who was running things, and who was important, who was deemed important and not, to these supply chains. So, you know, all of a sudden, we'll say doing nothing, actively doing nothing seemed like a really potent subject to dive into. So, it was really through casual conversations over many lockdowns. Toronto had some of the longest lockdowns in the world. Um, and we were just all hanging out outside and continuously talking about these things. And I do have, as mentioned, a background in performance and thinking about the Fluxus movement, just like creating prompts that could break people out of the regular way of thinking. A lot of people were saying, why am I not doing more with this free time, quote unquote?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's so awesome.
And as artists, like, oh, we should be like instantly responding to it. But everyone was so debased in a way, right? And just trying to find some kind of footing. So that's where this project came out of okay, let's think about active rest as something really potent that we can do and easily do with no materials, no money. Like, that's the beauty of performance. You
Yeah.
can do it anywhere.
What were some of the prompts that you gave? Was it rest?
Yeah, well, one of them was, I
Nice.
mean, the very first thing that kicked off this project was, it was myself and 9 other artists that I got together that agreed to go on this experiment, this journey with me. And we met in Queen's Park, which is in Toronto here, and it is a site of historic protest. So, yeah, when people organize in Toronto, they often go there. So it felt like the right thing to do, on a work day, go there. And we read some readings and talked deeply about our relationship to sleep and, you know, going back to all the pressures that UTC puts on us. And we had a collective nap in the middle of the day, and
Oh, I love that.
it felt pretty good. People walked away feeling really energized. And, there were 5 prompts total. And this one, the first one, I called refuse. So the second one was rest, where on our own, we were tasked with napping, napping and documenting. And it was actually shocking how difficult that was for many people.
To nap?
To nap, A
Wow.
lot of people, we live in a culture of grinding and nonstop productivity. So, you know, to force yourself to nap at a time that you normally wouldn't. And folks napped in all kinds of places. It was quite actually astounding. Some people, you know, napped in a forest just on a fallen log. Another person napped on the train. Very, very actually public places, which I thought was quite interesting. There was a conceptual thread of the order, but people didn't normally do it in the order that the book was laid out. There was attend, where you were simply mark making, just any mark, could be anything, and doing it for a full hour and just seeing how things changed. So it was about holding your attention a little bit longer. It was about slowing down. It was taking these really wide open prompts and applying it to whatever their practice was. And some people were writers and they chose to kind of write through it, but really different responses within this small group.
Mm-hmm. And when I look at these objects, so I had a screen share up there for a while. So are these like documentations of how people responded to the different prompts?
Yeah, it's I like to think of this printed project as
Mm-hmm.
like it's one part performance document, which chronicles all the beautiful things that people did and responded to the prompts with. But then there is also a field guide in there with the original prompts, the support material, which I mean, some of it was reading, some of it was videos,
Oh,
music.
that's so
It's
great.
kind of across the board. And I said right from the offset, like, take or leave, read it all or read nothing and just respond. It's
Mm-hmm.
totally for you to run with. So yeah, the idea is that anybody can pick these up and yeah, apply it to their practice, their life. You don't have to be an artist. I like to say a lot of these, one of them is called Wander, and it's simply going to a place you've never been before and making a map with your senses, whatever that means. It's totally up to interpretation. You could make an audio recording. You could simply just walk the space and pick up objects you see along the way. But it's again, making maybe something familiar out of the unfamiliar. It's just kind of taking yourself out of the regular humdrum and grind.
Mm. When you say it's not just for artists, are these like, is it like, are the prompts something that anyone could print out and follow and execute on their own?
That is the hope. Yeah. I'm actually doing a workshop in June in New York at this place called Effective Care, and it's a mental health center. So nothing to do with art.
All right, yeah.
But the folks that run it, they are artists and they have exhibitions in this space, and it's really quite cool.
Mm.
And so this will be the first time that I'm going to run some of these prompts, at least the first one, with a whole new group of people. And most of them won't be artists. So it's really about trying to give maybe alternative tools, performance-based tools, thinking somatically through these prompts of, well, what does a scientist produce
Mhm.
in response to this? Or, not even just a scientist, but anybody. Like
Right.
everyone is so individual. So what experiences are you bringing to that response?
Hmm. Now, I'm curious, as a way to kind of wrap up this conversation, I'm wondering if how you see this, this work and these actions related to some of the earlier work that we spoke about in terms of, in terms of time and or resisting time.
Yeah, I think it's again, it even though time feels like a monolith and it's oppressive and we don't really have control over this, I think bringing some agency back to the individual, we're living in this neoliberal hellscape, I'll say, where we're being squeezed and whittled from every side, and it's usually through our time. It's through the capture of our attention. It's through the demand to work. It's the cost of living. It's all these things. So, you know, I'm just looking for these little bits of crack, like little. I'm looking for cracks in the system where we can still find that agency, even if it's for ourselves and our immediate community. Because in a way, it's kind of like acupuncture, right? Where you're trying to just find that spot that can maybe set off a larger signal to the greater system.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for sharing your work with us and for chatting and for offering this workshop. I'll make sure to include a link to this space, and listeners, click away, follow all of the links that we're going to supply on social media and on our website. Emily, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, that's all for this week. Please be sure to tune in next week as I will be speaking with Lauren Wordy, a Philly-based painter, educator, and curator who currently teaches at the University of the Arts and Tyler School of Art and Architecture in Philadelphia. Over the course of the conversation, we talk about Lauren's studio and domestic-inspired paintings, her navigation through the art world, and her experience as co-director of Ortega y Gasset Gallery in New York City. Hope to see y'all next week. Have a safe week. Bye-bye.